Okay, so how I've stayed lean for upwards of 11 to 12 years now seems to be some sort of mysterious tactic that nobody's mentioning online. And, although many people, try and they look stuff up and everything, they get misled into all sorts of nonsensical stuff. And the reason they're being is because as the internet becomes increasingly accessible and people are increasingly talking, people are going to default to the lowest common denominator and their collective unconscious. So, what that means is that really slowly but surely, the more people talk about this stuff, the more they are going to default to kind of bullshit answers and bullshit excuses to really just keep engaging in bad behavior or undisciplined behavior, so to speak. So, I'm going to tell you how I've stayed lean over the past 11 years relatively effortlessly. And when I say effortlessly, that means that I'm not really, spending all day, every day measuring out and tracking my calories and, you know, uh, calculating decision making processes every single time I go to eat something. So let me check if I'm recording here still. There was one day where I went an entire hour or so and I totally cooked and then I didn't hit record. So, classic mistake there. All right. So, firstly, I'm going to debunk what currently goes on. Firstly, there's this myth that fitness is 80% diet, 20% workouts. And that's supposed to be some sort of. So, I'll debunk that shortly. The carbs thing, people are always talking about carbs, 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 and like that Mean Girls scene where she's like, "Is this a carb? Like carbs make you fat and that sort of thing." I'll debunk that, which I don't understand why this isn't common knowledge at this point, but I'll go over that and specifically the carbohydrate relationship to fiber and how you can, chill with this idea that if you eat a carb, you're going to instantaneously get obese. All right. I'll talk about why endless cardio is not working for you at all. And where this myth of, oh, cardio burns fat really comes from. And then I'll go over what really seems to be this collective unconscious that I mentioned earlier. So, firstly, fitness is 80% diet. So, and 20% workout. So, what's remarkable is you'll notice that people have this sort of this thing online where they want to give like cutesy dootsy condescending like one liners, I was on Twitter and it was circulating that Jennifer Lopez broke up with Ben Affleck and then she had this stupid post where it was like, she was naked basically and it was like, oh, it was summer. So like those condescending one-liners that are intentionally like vague and easy to for people to like digest and accept, but will misinterpret is precisely one of these examples of how people get online and then they just say fucking dumb shit. So, firstly, this fitness is 80% diet and 20% workout. That's supposed to be some sort of woke thing, like edgy. I'm edgy against the fitness community and I'm like smart and I got this figured out. But really, that's just stolen from the fucking economic Pareto principle. All right, that's what that's called, 80-20. You could look that up. That's the economic 80-20, economic Pareto principle. And the Pareto principle essentially says that, more so, I mean, it applies to many things. It actually does turn out to be a behavioral phenomenon amongst many things, but it's primarily sourced from this idea or this observation that if you're selling vapes or whatever, let's say, 80% of your sales are going to be generated by 20% of your customers. All right, so what that means basically is that whenever you're selling something, most of the business you're going to do is with people who are there and returning most of the time. So what that's really meant to do is give you a hint on what to focus on. Some people take that as I got to focus on the people that, stay here consistently. And some people might think that The strategy there being is then to focus on bringing more people in. There's, all sorts of explanations for both, but that's what that is. All right, so people just think that sounds cute and they hijack it. Sorry, the dogs are playing here and making noise. People just take that, hijack that because it sounds cute. And so, according to what, basically, right? I'm not going to data, facts and data and science this, but according to what? Like, under what circumstance is, why is it so that 80% of your fitness or fitness is 80% diet, 20% fitness? It's really, the real reason for that, they think that is not because it's 80-20 fitness, but it's because it's 80% diet because they're giving 20% on their workouts, meaning that it's only 80 diet, 20% workouts if your workouts are fucking lazy and bullshit and fucking 3 times a week, 20-minute fucking incline Stairmaster or whatever. All right. So that's that. All right. So really, my strategy with this is to flip that idea. And I flipped that idea by more so focusing on getting to the fucking gym consistently, not 3-4 times a week, not 5 times a week, like bare minimum 6 times a week, and really 7 times a week, and with like a day that you don't go sprinkled in there once every 2 to 4 weeks, say. Because that's the problem for most people. Most people's problem isn't fucking, eating precise amounts of carbs and nutrients under this precise circumstance and all that. The problem is most people don't fucking get up and go to the gym and fucking do anything. Specifically, and I've mentioned this in my other video, but reason why that is much more effective to go by is because when you're working out and not just fucking doing dumb classes or prancing around and all of that, when you're working out by lifting weights in such a way that you are gaining both size and strength, you are increasing what's called your basal metabolic rate. Basal is in base, your base metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn calories just to exist, essentially. And the reason this is important, and I have this pulled up here, and I'll just, I won't do the thing that I've been doing because it's actually really annoying to do that in video editing software. So I'll just put up a screenshot instead. All right. But I remember reading this years ago, and it said that for every pound of muscle you put on, extra pound of muscle you put on, you burn an extra 100 calories per day just to exist with that extra pound of muscle on. Now, numerically, I'm not quite sure I believe it goes all the way up that way because in my first year of lifting, I went from 120 pounds to 150 pounds. I still ate the same amount of calories per day that I would be eating when I was 120 pounds. Roughly, maybe it went up 500 to 1,000. But according to that math, that would mean that I would need another 3,000 calories a day at the end of that year just to exist. But think of the magnitude of that. That would mean that, let's suppose that it did go all the way that high. That would mean that in addition to the roughly 2,500 to 3,000 calories most people have to eat, just whether or not they work out or not, in addition to that, you'd have to eat an extra 3,000 calories a day. So that'd come out to about 5,500 to 6,000. Now, you might say, if you don't have a frame of reference for calories and eating and all that stuff, you might say, oh, okay, well, that helps, but I'm not sure I'll still lose weight. And when people say lose weight, they mean lose fat, which is not the same thing as losing weight. But you have to eat 5,500 to 6,000 calories a day. That is fucking hard to do. I'm telling you, that is hard to do. That's a lot of fucking eating all day, every day. So what's that strategy? Does that mean, oh, okay, so I'm gonna try that, I'm gonna eat that much? What that strategy means is that you have a much larger margin of error for how much you eat every day. So, for example, let's say you wind up eating around 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. That means that you have a 1,500 to 2,000 calorie margin of error per day, which means that you really don't have to think twice anymore about how much you eat and what you eat all day, every day. Now, that doesn't mean turn that into a fucking cope and turn that into a bullshit excuse to start pigging out all day. But what that does mean is that in exchange for all these, technicalities and meticulously measuring your weight, measuring the food and all of that, that so long as that you worked out that day for an hour and a half, 2 hours, actually lifting weight in such a way that the weight is challenging and it's making you build muscle and everything. And you could go over some of my other videos about the strategy for how to do so. That means that in exchange for an hour and a half to 2 hours a day for weightlifting or whatever, you never again have to think twice about how much you've eaten all day and precisely measure out this, that, the other thing. Again, don't turn that into a fucking cope and turn that into a bullshit excuse to be a pig all day. But that's that margin of error. And let's suppose that the calorie thing, so this right here says about 50 to 100. So let's say that's on the lower end. That still means that's an extra about 1,500 calories a day you have to eat just to exist if you gain 30 pounds. You gain 30 pounds of muscle. So think about the magnitude of that. And we'll jump around a little bit here, but why does nobody get that? Well, because people focusing so hard on the food speaks to the brain slavery they have to food and the dopamine related to food. And it speaks to their slavery to their instincts to conserve energy. Because 80% food and 20% diet is the easier thing to do. Being all crazy about, now, when I say easy, what I just said was that got at my method was easier, but it's not easier or less effortful in terms of the amount of energy you have to put out and the time you have to put out. But it's easier psychologically. It's easier psychologically because you know that you did the right thing every day by going to the gym. And you don't have to think about it much more ever again or for the rest of the day or whatever. But that's the harder thing to do energy-wise. And because everyone's a fucking lazy pig, they'd rather focus on the food. And they figure when they give this 80-20 diet thing, what does that evolve into? Just think about you and your habits, for example. What does that really evolve into? That evolves into, for like one day, you eat a banana instead of fucking a donut for breakfast in the morning. For one day you do that, and then like it just perfidiously, magically disappears from your consciousness and you're doing the same habits that you've had. A good rule of thumb is that it's easier to develop a good habit rather than try to get rid of a bad habit. So, this speaks to the collective unconscious dopamine obsession with food. You gotta just engineer your brain to think about things in different terms other than, fucking dopamine and food. All right. And then psychodynamically, what that does is that it enables freedom from guilt for not weightlifting. All right. So people want to get in better shape and all of that, and they feel guilty for not getting in better shape. But rather than attack that guilt directly by doing what's the most correct thing, which is weightlifting, they'd rather come up with a way to flip it whereby they give themselves an excuse, they give themselves a way to offload the guilt, but without actually having to put out much more energy and effort and so on. So by making it a 80-20 food thing, it's, yes, okay, so now I don't have to feel guilty about not working out, and I still get to not work out. Yes, because, I'm being fit because I'm eating my food. I'm making so I eat healthy, which means lots of fruit and vegetables. So that's the psychology there, and that's a lot of what I focus on with the fitness stuff because that's the source of the problem for most people. Information is all out there. We all fucking know what the answer is. The answer is to shut the fuck up, get to the gym, and get moving, and put on muscle. And there's all sorts of copes related to that, or I don't want to get too big, and I go over that in some other videos. I don't want to make that part too long. All right. Okay, so I'll continue on to the psychology as it relates to the other components here. So next, the carbs and fiber thing. So again, for some reason, people seem to, blatantly misunderstand this. And, I'm checking out the natural light in here. I'm trying this time during the day, so I have the window open here. I wanted to see how the natural light goes. But so for carbs and fiber, now here's the actual biochemical process for carbs. Carbohydrate is if you're familiar with chemistry, the words give hints to what's actually going on. So carbohydrate, it sounds like it involves carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. And that's because it does. And so whatever the chemistry is of why that's breakable down for energy, I do know this. Your blood sugar glucose is a form of carbohydrate, and then it gets broken down. The bonds break, which releases energy, and so on. But the important thing is, okay, so carbs, right? We think of sugar, and everything has too much sugar in it. So sugar, what it is, all right, its chemical property name is sucrose. And the reason why it's so dangerous for weight gain and all of that is because sucrose is very molecularly similar to glucose. If the words sound very similar, it's because their molecular structures are similar. So you have sucrose. Fruit sugar is fructose. A good one is artificial sweetener, sucralose. It can't get broken down for sugar, but it still has for energy, sugar, glucose. It can't get broken down because it's different, whatever that terminology is. But its molecular structure is similar to sucrose in such a way that our brains, read it as sucrose taste-wise. And that's how you have artificial sweeteners. It tastes kind of like sugar. It tricks our brains into thinking it's sugar, but it's not. So that's an example of the chemical properties there. And the reason why that's important is because if they're molecularly similar, it's very easy for your body to, break it down and transfer it into glucose. So what that means is when you ingest sugar, your body very quickly turns it into blood sugar. And if you're dumping a whole bunch of sugar into your system, in a similar fashion, your body can dump a whole ton of glucose into your blood. That's what the sugar rush is. So the problem with that is that you got all of this energy once you consume sugar in that moment, and but you have no use for it because you're not fucking working out. So what does the body do? Its hunter-gatherer build evolution is to conserve that extra energy at all costs, thereby turning it into fat. So that's the problem with that. Now, you might have also heard... Can you chill out, please? You might have also heard so then there's complex carbs, and complex means it's harder for it to get broken down into glucose. But in a similar fashion, it still kind of dumps it all in there, not as quickly, and that's why, complex carbs are better. But in a similar fashion, you have all this input of energy, and you're not putting it out, so it gets stored as fat. So really, that concludes us into basically crazy fucking concept, but it's not about the diet, it's about your fucking activity. Okay. So then you might have also heard of fiber and the relationship of fiber to carbs. And fiber is like a type of carb, blah, 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 whatever. But a lot of what fiber does is slows down your digestion of carbs. And this is important because, and this was like from a class I took, it really stuck with me. It was like years ago in community college, but it was like fiber is one of the most neglected elements of diet amongst most people. And the average American, I think, only gets like 5 grams of fiber per day, and men need about 30. and women need about 20. So really the problem with carbs is the level of activity and just not nerfing it, so to speak, with fiber. But more so the activity, okay? Don't turn that into a fucking cope and turn that into, oh, okay, so I could just eat fiber and kapoof. I'm going to, not have a gut anymore. Not how that fucking works. But that's the relationship with carbs and fiber to blood sugar and your body's use of energy. So really the solution there that I've been incorporating for a very long time is just try to nerf that with fiber and just, replace sugary things with like sucralose things. The easiest version of that is just get rid of all sugary drinks. Just like grow up and drink water. Or 0-calorie energy drinks here. I am an energy drink head, which isn't actually unhealthy, but we could get into that another time. Okay. So, and for some reason, this isn't like common knowledge. I don't understand why and or how. It's not that hard to find this or to look this up. People, because you know what it is? People, they're psychodynamic is they want to assign a prohibition to the consumption of something because that'll alleviate them of the guilt if they follow that. So they just jump to trying to find some sort of prohibition. And again, prohibiting X amount of carbs per day is much easier than weightlifting. But the problem with that is that it is not the establishment of a good habit. It is attempting to remove a bad habit. And in a way, because it takes so much less investment to like carefully consider how much food you eat, it's harder for that to stay on that because there's this like phenomenon where if you have to invest more into something, you're more likely to stick with it. So that includes with energy. But, with the prohibiting carbs thing, is that really, it doesn't take much. You might think, oh, okay, this is going to be great. This is going to be easy. I'm going to just like, not eat these candies or something. But because that takes so little of you, you're necessarily going to almost like presume that the consequence of it is also a marginally positive. So you're going to wind up being like, oh, okay, well, it's worth it this time. I'm going to get it this time. And then there's like all bullshit psychodynamics like, I'm so stressed, so I need stress relief. Go take a fucking walk if you need stress relief. Covering up your stress with dopamine and drug-like behavior is not going to have that effect. So, and I'm encouraging you to work out. That's the first and foremost thing. But if you're really going to be that like, whatever about that, if you literally change nothing else, watch what happens when you increase your fiber intake. And sources of fiber, beans, the skins of fruits and vegetables basically. Those are the first three I think of. And those are like going to be the easiest primary sources of fiber anyway. Okay. So, and in short, so in other words, my strategy is fucking raise your basal metabolic rate by putting on muscle. And you're not going to infinitely put on muscle. There is going to be a cap on it. All right. But for reference, I weigh 170 pounds now, whereas when I started, I weighed 120. So you can imagine that if I'm eating not all that much more than I did when I was 120, you can imagine that, I'm never going to get fucking fat because it's hard to eat enough to get fat with my daily life and habits. And there's, all sorts of schizoid Twitter fitness epic people who are going to give this cope of like, actually, well, you got to eat to get big. And that's another bullshit excuse just to be a pig anyway, but I'll go over that another time. Okay. So the endless cardio, right? So people say, oh, I want to work out or whatever. I'm going to do endless cardio. So we already talked about cardio is the easier workout. Again, right? Going for a cutesy dootsy little jog and walking on your stupid incline fucking treadmill. That's the easy thing. The hard thing is the lifting weights. So it speaks again to the collective unconscious of trying to get there, but still trying to come up with a bullshit excuse to half-ass your way there anyway. What's more is that in my last video, I talked a lot about how when people say, I want to get healthy, I want to lose weight, they're picturing somebody like me or somebody who looks even better than me. They're picturing that, but you don't fucking get there without lifting weights on both ends, both for men and women. So the cardio thing, so let's go over the cardio burns fat myth anyway. So this comes from this layer to it. You do cardio, so you know for certain you're putting out energy, so you're certainly burning some kinds of calories. But the idea that cardio is the main means by which to burn fat is because there is a science to it in that there's a relationship with your max heart rate and an optimal heart rate burning zone. And the way it goes is this. And we'll pretend I'm 20 years old, so just to make the math a little easier. So you do 220 minus your age, that's 200. So that's your max heart rate right then and there. 220 minus whatever your age is. If you're 50 years old, 220 minus 50 is 170. So that's your max heart rate. Now, when your heart rate is at a 70 to 85% of your max heart rate, it specifically selects fat to burn for calories. It goes into whatever the term is, ketosis or whatever. So 70 to 85% of your heart rate when you're 20 years old is 140 beats per minute to like 160 something. Is it 160? What's 85 plus 8? 170. So now the problem therein lies in as follows. Your body in that heart rate range might be specifically selecting fats to burn because it's such a light form of exercise. It's still not burning that much fat in the first place. Okay, so it might be specifically selecting fat, and I'm not too sure about the numbers. I have a treadmill calculator pulled up here. So if we go by me, my weight is 170. Let's say I'm running for 20 minutes. It's 2 miles. The speed is 6 miles per hour. You press 6 on the treadmill. It says, it estimates that I burned 276 calories. So all that just to burn 276 calories. And that might sound like a good amount. That's like a fucking snack or two. Okay, so people who go, oh, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to run on the treadmill and I'm going to go. By the way, I use 20 minutes because it takes 20 minutes for it to actually start doing that. So really, so far, your calories burned from fat are still kind of zero. And the reason they're being is because the first 20 to 30 minutes, it's using the calories that it has ready to go in the system from what you've been eating and all of that. That's why there's the idea of fasted cardio to jump right into that. Okay, so let's just go with it. Let's just say you were doing fasted cardio and you're burning it from the start. So you burn 276 calories worth of fat. That's like a snack, dude. Which means that if, you miss out on it for a day, and you eat a snack that following day, it gets negated. But you still eat a snack that day, it gets negated. And how easy it is it to miss a treadmill workout of running 20, 30 minutes? Because, again, that's an easy thing to do. And you're like, oh, I could do this anytime, anywhere, so I'll put it off and so on. So it's not burning enough calories in the first place. And especially if you're young, 20 years old, this probably only burns 100 calories. If you're 20 years old, 70 to 85% of your max heart rate is the lightest, easiest fucking jog ever. All right. So this myth that the endless cardio burns fat comes from the idea that it specifically selects fat, but the problem is that the exercise overall still isn't burning enough calories in the first place. So cardio, that was weird. I stumbled there. I almost said it like an Irish person. Cardio. So cardio really needs to not be your primary means of exercise. And really, I don't do cardio at all. So, and I'm fucking like, at any given moment, 10 to 12% body fat. So, what that speaks to is that the cardio idea is a crock of shit and it shouldn't be your primary means of exercise. I will say, though, it is an important form of exercise because your heart is a muscle and it's literally building your heart muscle. And why that's important is because if your heart is stronger throughout the rest of the day, it has to work less hard. So it brings your resting heart rate down. It brings your heart rate down for the rest of the day overall, which elongates your life because you're not using as many ticks per day, so to speak. In a similar fashion, this is why obesity people have heart disease and heart problems because their heart has to work harder all day because they weigh so much. So their heart is burning, I don't know, their resting heart rate's like 100 beats per minute. And that's why bodybuilders have heart problems too, because they're too heavy for their heart. It's too taxing on their heart. So that is that. So in other words, my tactic is fucking lift weights, put on muscle, and worry about all that other stuff later. Don't take this as an excuse to be a pig and don't take this as an excuse to never do cardio. But take this as, you really got to like grow the fuck up and just like lift the weights seriously and in a way that's challenging. Put on the extra muscle and your body will never let you get, I've just mentioned weight. Your body will never let you get to a point at which you weigh too much in muscle. I've been hovering around 160 to 170 pounds for years. That's like precisely the max possible weight I could get before it starts becoming a problem, or at least a little bit of a problem on my heart. Okay. So your counter to this might be like, well, I'm not trying to get muscle. I just want to be toned. And it's like, look, you're just going to have to accept that you're not going to fucking get toned without putting on muscle. If you're a guy and you don't want to put on muscle, what the fuck is wrong with you? What do you have to lose by doing that? What exactly would be a negative consequence of that? That you can't jerk off as much? You don't get enough dopamine? And there's other layers to this too. You're putting on muscle, it increases your testosterone. It has to, because testosterone is a necessary ingredient to putting on that muscle as a response. So as a response to weightlifting, your body's natural test goes up. And test also is a part of burning calories and burning fat and so on. And that's a little bit too deep for this part. But notice how this always leads to, it's the same fucking answer every time, is lift fucking weights and get big. Now, if you're a woman, you might say, well, I don't want to get too big. First of all, just to give you a frame of reference, the lowest male testosterone, like before it becomes like a medical problem, is like 300 nanograms per deciliter or something like that, like free testosterone. Women's free testosterone is not even like 100. So what that means is that you're never going to come close to looking like a man. You just simply don't have the biophysiology for it. And you might say, okay, well, I still don't want to get too big or too or unattractive or whatever. That's literally not possible to happen. It's evolutionary, psychologically, evo-psychologically, not possible for that to be unattractive or to be unideal, because a huge part of attraction is health indicators too. So when you lift weights, your body is naturally going to give off signals of health. And there's no possible way that somebody's not going to be attracted to that. The only reason a man might say he's unattracted to that is because he finds it threatening because you're stronger than he is. That's honestly, and I hate saying stuff like that because that's what women say, men are always coping and all that. But it really is a cope. It really is like a gay cope when men say stuff like that. So there's no such thing as being too big for both men and women, or too muscular or whatever. And if you're just behaving like naturally, if you're just kind of like doing, you're lifting weights and you're eating naturally and all that stuff, you're not going too crazy with it, your body fat percentage is going to stay ideal without you thinking twice about it all day, every day. All right. So don't be worried about this strategy making you too lean. Okay. So this really hints at the psychology being the source of the problem for most people. The psychology, you got to transition your psychology to You're going to have to accept that, like, the human condition is that nothing, anywhere, anytime is going to be fucking easy. There's no tips, there's no tricks, there's no cheats, there's no anything. You're going to have to accept that you're going to have to fucking lift weights every day to get the results that you want with this. You might say, oh, well, what kind of life is that? You know, but then I don't get my dopamine and I don't get my pleasure. And it's like, how is that not tiresome to you by now? What's worse? What's worse? A life where you hate yourself and you're miserable, but you get your fucking num-nums and dopamine? Or a life where you're not fucking constantly fucking coom braining, but you're happy, you're fulfilled, you feel good about yourself, you have a mission, you have a purpose, you're attracting who you want to attract, you're socializing, and so on. All right. So the psychology, people love to just turn it into find a way to rid themselves of the guilt, but still doing the easy thing. You're going to have to accept that it's going to be the fucking hard thing. And realistically, it's not hard per se. When I say hard, it's the harder thing to do between those two things, but it's the only way to generate results. So the other thing isn't really a way to achieve this in the first place. It's a way to just achieve the goal of, tricking yourself into believing you're doing the right thing. So you're going to have to accept that what requires more energy and is more challenging, getting up, going to the gym, making it a thing that you dedicate yourself every day is the only fucking answer. The psychology otherwise is people say want to do it the easy way or want to. I'm stumbling across my words here. I'm losing my thought here, reaching the limit for my brain power here. Focusing on the eating is just being a slave to like your amygdala or whatever. All right. Instead of focusing on sucking it up, buttercup, and getting to the weights. All right. I mentioned that it's more effective to build a good habit than to remove a bad one. I think there's like some sort of number of this is like it takes 21 days to start a good habit or start a habit overall, but 3 months to, really knock off a bad habit. And the longer that bad habit has been withstanding, the longer that probably is. I think I've read that somewhere. You could look that up, but that speaks to it, right? It probably floats somewhere around there. So it takes 21 days to build a good habit, but 3 months to knock off a bad habit. So think about the magnitude of that. What is more likely to guarantee you results then? Worrying about the food and knocking off your bad habits with food, or starting good habits? All right. The endless cardio and trying to make the workouts really the easier workouts, the bullshit thing is the same process, the same psychological process. We say we want to get in shape, we want to get fit, and so on, but we still want to come up with a bullshit excuse not to lift weights, so we do the endless cardio because the endless cardio burns fat, and we think we're so justified in doing so because cardio burns fat. That myth still is in perpetuity all across the internet and stuff, right? And then just overall, people get mad because the results speak for themselves. If you really don't believe me or whatever, try doing your gay little fucking cardio and your gay little fucking fad diets and watch if you get any results. The amount of dudes I've come across who are like, this dude, and he might be watching this, so this is me busting his balls a little bit, but he said to me, so when I was in the Army, there was these like epically epic genius science-backed trainers with their master's degree in fucking athletic training or whatever. And this isn't too much shit at them. Some of them did teach me a handful of good things. One of them, a handful of them worked a lot with me on actually fixing a lot of knee problems I had. I kept getting patellar tendonitis, but that was because my squat form was forcing a lot of pressure on my knees as opposed to my hips. And I guess just like the male thing of like your center of gravity is up here, so you're never thinking about how to put weight on your hips. So this isn't anything too shady at them, but he was approaching me and he was like a tough guy in the DFAC, and he was saying, they told me if I do their workouts, blah, 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 whatever. So I was like, all right, do them and see if you look like me or better. And sure enough, it didn't fucking happen. And this is how it goes every time. People think that they can come up with tips and tricks, and I say, okay, do them. Do them and watch what happens. Watch if you look better than me or get stronger than me. And every time it doesn't happen. But people get mad because they're so convinced, and they get mad because they get to finally categorize this all in a nicely neat little box, and they're like, yes, it's a cheat code, and they try to trick themselves, and then the results totally blow the lid off of those tricks they play on themselves. So they have to come up with something else, genetics, steroids, or something like that, as a way to excuse why somebody else looks better while lifting weights, while they don't look better from the cardio and all of that. So, and then you just get into all sorts of, the psychology is you just get into, your mind starts getting fertilized for all sorts of bullshit, negativity. All that as an elaborate fucking way to just dodge weightlifting. Like, the results speak for themselves is what I'm getting at, essentially. Try it the gay way, watch yourself not get results. Try it my way, watch what fucking happens. Okay, so in short, the Fitneth is 80% diet and 20% workout is hijacking the economic Pareto principle, speaks to a bullshit food slavery from the amygdala and collective unconscious, excuses weightlifting. We have carbs and fiber. Carbs digest and get turned into glucose way too easily, so you nerf that by just switching from sugar to fucking complex carbs. And you nerf that by ingesting enough fiber through the skin of fruits and vegetables and beans. And you could just Google, sources of fiber. All right. Your cardio, your endless cardio selects fat to burn, but it still doesn't burn enough fat. All right. Cardio is just an excuse to not do what's actually challenging. And finally, the biggest takeaway from this specific strategy is to raise your basal metabolic rate, which is the rate at which you burn calories every day just by existing, by lifting weights and putting on muscle. So that's it for this topic. Those are the Marchese methods to staying lean for 11 years straight. And this can all be summed up in one phrase, and that is keep your eyes on the prize. You're not getting the results right now. You got to figure out a way to get those results, even if it means shaking up your little worldview. That's what eyes on the prize means. So, thanks for tuning in. See you next time.